questions?
No.
Okay, so if you have questions afterwards, you're just going to go to the side.
Okay.
Once it's your time, we'll.
Ooh.
Dr. Messalores will be keeping time for you. And then you're free to answer questions to the side while the next person sets up.
Sure.
So once they're ready, just make sure you wrap up questions. Okay.
Great.
Yes, thank you.
And I will check in on that music stand.
Thank you.
Yay. What's that? Just download your thing. Yeah. Extra is yeah. Good.
They are.
Okay.
I think that should be included here. And I think Emma just told you that. At the end, if there's questions,
Okay. Yeah, so we'll just walk over there.
yeah.
Okay. Just so music stand. I think that's pretty worth it. We'll get there. We'll get there. Okay.
And 8:45.
Is that our target?
So we have, well, we have 45 minutes. So this will be 15.
Okay.
So,
Okay. Including.
so I proposed.
Okay. Okay. Great. That's what I know would quit a little early. I mean, if she's trying to start it now, she'll want to wear this.
Yeah. So do you want to try to finish?
Maybe good.
Yeah.
Could be, would be
Yeah.
good.
Okay, so we'll start at 8:45.
Good.
Musical
Great.
things. Yeah.
Okay. Do you mind helping me?
Of course.
Good morning, everybody. I think we'll get started. Welcome. So today, this morning, we are presenting A Century of Musical Perspectives on Georgia Douglas Johnson. Presenting, we have Gwynne Brown and Dawn Padula. Please help me in welcoming them this morning.
Thank you. Thank you for being here so early for the first course of this feast today. I can't thank Daryl Taylor and all the people that are supporting this event enough. It's just such a delight to be part of it. And I think I speak for both of us in saying that. So Georgia Douglas Johnson, I'd love to tell you a little bit about her. She's widely considered the foremost female poet of the Harlem Renaissance. She was born in 1880 in Atlanta, and was a bright kid, loved school, loved music from an early age, taught herself violin, and she went to Atlanta University Normal School and was a school teacher for a little while. And then in her early 20s, she said, no, I want to study music. So she went to Oberlin Conservatory for a hot minute before she married her husband, Henry Lincoln Johnson, who was an attorney, 10 years her senior. And that was the end of Oberlin for her. The family moved to Washington, D.C. They had 2 sons. Her husband had a position with the Taft administration. And she was interested in writing poetry, short stories, songs. Her husband was not notably supportive of her literary ambitions. He was very excited for her to be in the home doing the things that a woman should do. He passed away in 1925. Music stand, thank you. And after that, it freed her in certain ways and also constrained her, certainly financially. Her existence was no longer as comfortable as it had been, but certainly her her ability to express herself through poetry and playwriting expanded after his passing. She published her first poem in 1905 and her first poetry collection in 1916, The Heart of a Woman. And she appeared, as you can see from the handout, if that's coming around, she was on the cover of The Crisis in 1920. She published poetry quite a bit in The Crisis, as well as a recurring column called Homely Philosophies from 1926 to 32 or so. Her first collection, The Heart of a Woman, really focuses on the woman's experience. And she got a little bit of pushback from folks in the African American community who thought maybe she should also be speaking from a perspective of an African American person. So her second collection in 1922, Bronze, takes on more racial issues as well as continuing gender issues. W.E.B. Du Bois gave her a slightly sort of review on that, so she kind of couldn't win. But her playwriting certainly was a place where she was a really activist voice, particularly in the anti-lynching movement. She was very visible. And although she lived mostly in Washington, D.C., and never lived in Harlem, associated with the Harlem Renaissance, because her home, she opened for salons, right? So all of these figures from the Harlem Renaissance, people like Langston Hughes, Jessie Redmond Fawcett, Alan Locke, all of these people would come to her house. She was incredibly hospitable, and they would have what you can only imagine were wonderful gatherings to talk about the arts. And she also opened her home to people that were struggling, including Zora Neale Hurston, stayed with her for a while when she was having a difficult time in her life. And she, her last poetry collection was published in 1962. She published 4 altogether. She wrote about 28 plays, not all of which were published, but she was really very prolific. And she also composed a number of songs. And it's my understanding that her collection is at Yale at the Beinecke Library. So a very interesting person, and I'm very interested in what her music was like. Her poetry was obviously really interesting to composers, and I have to expect that because she was a musician herself, because she thought musically, she wrote poetry that was very appealing to composers to set. So we have for you 5 songs. We have 2 settings of The Heart of a Woman and 3 settings of I Want to Die While You Love Me. And it's always fascinating to see how composers approach this kind of dialogue with a poem. One thing about Johnson's poetry is it tends to have a very, very steady meter and a very predictable kind of rhyme scheme. And so composers have this opportunity to enter into almost a polyrhythmic kind of engagement with the rhythm of the poetry. So I think all 5 of these songs do really interesting things to complicate what could otherwise be a very predictable kind of a rhythmic scheme. So I would love to read to you a little poetry. The Heart of a Woman from her first collection. The heart of a woman goes forth with the dawn as a lone bird, soft winging so restlessly on. Afar o'er life's turrets and vales does it roam. In the wake of those echoes, the heart calls home. The heart of a woman falls back with the night and enters some alien cage in its plight, and tries to forget it has dreamed of the stars while it breaks, breaks, breaks on the sheltering bars. She dedicated this poem to her husband. And I don't think it's very subtle. So obviously we have the metaphor of the bird flying out at dawn and coming back at night, surveying God's creation and then coming back to the cage, and the sheltering bars is such a vivid phrase. So we're going to perform 2 settings, one by Florence Price, who shared some experience, I think, with Johnson. And in this setting, you really get a sense of the grandeur of the world, how much is out there, and this sense of almost desperation in the harmonies, moving from key to key to key. And the conclusion of this song has this inexorable chromatic descent back to the tonic that just, you really feel this kind of closing in. Very powerful. The second setting by H. Leslie Adams from his cycle Night Songs is very different. It's swinging and bluesy and very, very beautiful. Both of the stanzas start in F major and then work their way to the relative minor, so you have this sense of returning to the minor. You get a fascinating conclusion to this song. We've gone from F major to D minor, and then at the very end, almost as a non sequitur, you get a return to F major, but it's a polychord and it's very uneasy. And so at the end of this setting that is so beautiful and so lyrical, what I take from it is it's the way that the woman presents herself to the world. It's this composure. But by the end of the song, we've heard the desperation. And so when it returns to this placid kind of texture, we understand what's underneath it. And that last chord prevents us from having any sort of sense of it's all going to be okay. It's really very uncompromising, I think. So we're going to perform these two settings for you.
The heart of a woman goes forth with the dawn, as a lone bird soft winging, so restlessly on, afar on life's terrains and fields as it roam, in the wake of those echoes. What calls home?
Talking and playing. My brain is exploding a little bit. But what a pleasure, gosh, to talk about this. My dream is that I won't talk so much that we don't have time to do a little discussion. This room feels very friendly. And there's everywhere I look, I see people I admire. So I would love to hear your thoughts, including one of the composers of the next set is here. And I know you didn't come here to lecture, but you know, I'm very interested to hear what you think. Yes, no. So our second poem is I Want to Die While You Love Me. This is from 1922, and I'll read it to you first. I want to die while you love me, while yet you hold me fair, while laughter lies upon my lips and lights are in my hair. I want to die while you love me, and bear to that still bed your kisses, turbulent, unspent, to warm me when I'm dead. I want to die while you love me. Oh, who would care to live till love has nothing more to ask and nothing more to give? I want to die while you love me, and never, never see the glory of this perfect day grow dim or cease to be. So this is a slightly more ambiguous or ambivalent poem, I think, than the first. It's very romantic, very sensual, and there's all this death talk. So it seems to me that the speaker of this poem is experiencing a perfect day, perfect love. It's a pretty sexy love, I would say, at this point. And so, you know, this person is immersed in this ecstasy, and also thinking that the way life works is that things do not stay the same. That age happens, that love can cool, that ultimately death happens. And so there's this kind of fascinating tension between these two things. And I think all three of the settings approach this in really fascinating ways. One thing about the meter of this poem is that the first line, I want to die while you love me, there's nothing sing-song about that, right? It's got these two really emphatic words, die and love, and the line kind of insists on you like stopping on those words. And then everything else, while yet you hold me fair, while laughter lies upon my lips. So the rest of it has that kind of character, but that opening line really stops you cold. And again, it's wonderful the way the composers deal with this. All three of the composers set the text in sort of creative ways. You'll notice as you listen, so Harry T. Burleigh's setting leaves off the fourth stanza entirely. Dr. Powell's setting repeats the last stanza twice, and then Undine Smith-Moore's does the first stanza, the last stanza, and then works back. So 1, 4, 3, 2. So every way that you rearrange it puts a different emphasis that you hear also in the music. And so Harry T. Burleigh's setting is so delicious. It's so operatic. It's got this kind of Wagnerian chromaticism to it. It's very, very luscious. I hear it a little bit, maybe as a little afterglow sort of a situation, maybe. But I also hear this setting as a very interior monologue. So the speaker is not speaking to the person who has brought about all this pleasure and delight. They're sort of reflecting in their mind on the pleasure, but also on this pesky thought, right? And although this setting in general is so beautiful, there is one moment, there's a piano interlude that ends with a very interesting augmented octave right before the line, to warm me when I'm dead. And so in the midst of all this lusciousness, there's this one like little kind of memento mori moment in the harmony. The very end of Burleigh's setting really reminds me, good morning, of Debussy's Prelude to the Afternoon of a Faun, that kind of dreaminess at the very end. So beautiful. The second setting we'll perform is by Rosephine Powell. It's the most recent of the settings, and this is another one dedicated to a husband, and clearly a much more romantic sort of a sentiment to dedicate. And this setting of the three, I think, expresses the most confidence that this partnership will endure. There's always these thoughts of what might happen, but in the end, I think it really affirms the pleasure of this love will endure. And I think by setting the last stanza both in a more tumultuous middle section and then returning to it it's a bit of an ABA sort of form, and the A's are quite just beautiful and romantic and tender. And by setting that stanza both in the middle tumultuous section and then returning to it in the more tender music, I think it, in a sense, resolves some of the angst of this poem in a really beautiful, beautiful way. And then the final one we'll do is by Undine Smith Moore. And this one, I think, is the most explicit about both the grandeur of the pleasure and the certainty, in this case, I think, of the end. And each of the stanzas starts with this bold, I want to die while you love me, and then each stanza works its way down even further until by the end we've really, we are really existing in a realistic sort of a sense of time passing and things pass, which makes the pleasure all the more marvelous for the contrast with the inevitable end. So without further ado, here are three settings of I Want to Die While You Love Me.
I want to die while you love me. unspent. To me, when I'm dead.
I did it. I didn't talk the whole time. A musicologist who didn't talk the whole time. So 5 minutes or so before we let Jones set up.
Go ahead and set up while you're taking your questions.
Perfect. So questions or comments. I mean, there's so much to notice and admire in these settings, and I would love to. Please.
My name is Cece, and I love this. I'm here kind of as a poet English scholar. And so this is exactly what I think art song does, is it allows us to rediscover poems. I mean, her poetry and her place in the Renaissance of the 20s and 30s is so marginalized. George Douglas,
Yes.
Johnson's. And so what I found wonderful here is precisely the way that in any time the words resonate differently, as well as in the voice of each of the composers. So I think for literary people, it's such an opportunity to learn how a poem that you think on paper works one way could be interpreted in all sorts of ways. So I really appreciate that, and it's the kind of thinking and investigation that I think could really open up how literary people think about how to read, how to understand. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I love the idea of like understanding one another's fields better by looking at the places where they intersect. Thank you.
Can I interject here? In order for this to work, I know that you all want to be respectful to me, but you have to set up. We're not going to start late. So you have to go ahead and that has got to be the rolling theme of the day.
It's nice up here. You'll enjoy it. Hi, Allison.
Yeah, one of the things, I mean, I totally, I do a lot of work with composers and poets too, and what she said is exactly what is fascinating too. You can just get this lens sort of reflecting both directions into the music and the poem. And one of the things that strikes me in both poems really, but this idea that the poets, so carefully choose their words, right? And the kiss is turbulent, unspent to warm me when I'm dead. Dead is such a final word, and what I thought was so interesting in the three settings of that is that is just still, I mean, obviously it's the word that the poet used, so you have to work with it, but it's so final. She could have said gone, she could have said,
Resting.
or warm me when I'm cold. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
I mean, it wouldn't rhyme. It would be different. I'm so not going to be right. But it's just so interesting, right? Like that impact and how that just sort of becomes almost a hinge point for me in all the different settings. How that sort of just was part of the tone of the music. I don't know if anybody else sort of felt that, but I kept being drawn to that like a magnet.
I would like to agree with you in that. That was my approach, which is why I would take that B section faster. I would not play with the rhythms at all because I wanted them to experience the turbulence. And it's the turbulence of these kisses have not yet occurred. They're unspent. When she is dead, she anticipates this love warming this cold body. And that's how powerful this love is that even as a dead woman, it exists. So that's a very turbulent thought, which means it presses through and bare to that still bed. Your kisses, turbulent. That, to me, that's the power of that. And then you get, at least in mine, you get back to, she goes to death and sees that love existing. and then she comes back to the now, which is why I don't want this day to ever end.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because these kisses exist now.
She builds it in and she changes the
Say what
She
now?
builds it in and she changes the
Exactly, right.
And in your setting, because it comes so beautifully back to that serene feeling, like it's obviously that it's almost like a warning, like, you know, like, don't do this. Like we want to spend this time, you know, while we have it, and I think it's your setting did such a great job of really treating that as a B section, and then returning it back to the initial sentiment at the end. So yeah.
You just want to do our sexy this summer?
That's what we said.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know what reading of other poetry she did, obviously, I'm sure a lot. But I was struck when I think about this connection between lovemaking and passion and death. It just seems like the reference to the madrigal, that scene of the Renaissance seemed really, really clear to me.
Yes.
But kind of remade in another kind of way. So I don't know if that is a stretch to make that connection, but it just seems like that would have to have been somewhere in her mind.
It's definitely a double entendre. Yes, I think you're right. I think you're right. And to take that euphemism and turn it into something very concrete, I think is wonderful. Thank you. Yes, please.
Thank you. This was really wonderful. I may reveal some of my dark personality here, but I find myself wondering what are the implications for the lover who's left behind?
I was actually wondering how her husband died, because didn't he die in 25?
Yes.
So that's 3 years after this. I don't know. Maybe that wasn't anticipated.
He died after this poem.
Right, but I mean,
Yeah.
what's he saying?
Oh, right.
Like, did she see death? Was death a presence?
He's in the
at
next
all?
poem.
Well, I'll reveal something about myself. My first reading of this poem was she's thinking about, I'm going to get older. The lights are not going to be in my hair. I'm not going to have that youthful smile. And he's going to run out of kisses before I die. So I don't think she's worried about him. Please.
So what was her influence on future poets? She died in 1966.
Yeah.
So she had a long life.
She did.
So did she have an influence on other people's writing?
I feel like I should defer to the literature professor. I can't imagine that she didn't have some influence, but she's not terribly well known. So honestly, I don't have an answer to that question. I haven't looked into that. Yeah.
But she had salons, right?
She did.
If that was a hub for some sort of gathering.
Clearly, she personally was an influence on people.
I think about it in the 50s and 60s.
Yeah.
Playwrights and other poets, she had an influence.
Yeah.
What she had an influence on?
I hesitate to. Do you know? Yeah, thank you. I'm also thinking that she probably was not a fashionable poet. You know, her style and her interests and her perspective were rather genteel, right? And so I imagine mid-20th century that was probably not. But I think now, as we start to be more open to actually looking at what's underneath the surface of art that might seem to be tidy and genteel, I think it's a wonderful moment to reconsider her voice. Yeah.
That to be real quick, just about the Undine Moore setting.
Yeah.
That piece was written for Marie Hunter Goodman, who was a local singer in the Richmond area. I knew and heard her. I heard her sing this,
and it was a contralto. And so imagine that when she got to that middle section, it went way down there because she was exploring those colors as she talks about depth with a real contralto's voice. And so just imagine that, you know, that's where she was going with that. And then Marie could also explode up into the top register, up to about a G or A. It was a really thick, it was like a Marian Anderson thick, beautiful voice, but she was an amateur singer in the area. Wow. She did all the gigs. As a child.
That's tremendous.
Were there other settings for a mezzo or contralto? I mean, your voice, the color of your voice for these settings is so perfect. I think.
So it's not really indicated there. I believe that the burly, I believe I sang that in the high key, but it was, F was the high note, so it actually fits nicely with the mezzo-soprano. I believe that you have a lower version of Miss Wheatley's Garden, so there's a lower key of Rose Effenie's setting. However, I actually prefer the medium-high key just because of where it sits. And it does not really indicate in the other settings, yeah. But it really does fit nicely in that kind of upper middle and then, you know, right in the kind of middle of the staff for many of them, absolutely. Yeah.
But the more you transpose, the more, right?
No.
No, that's the key?
That's the key, yeah. It has G's at the top and, yeah, down to B at the bottom. Mm-hmm.
Anyone else?
You mentioned that Georgia Douglas Johnson was not regarded as a genteel or not regarded as a fashionable poet, correct? But yet she had some connection to Zora Neale Hurston?
Personal, at least.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because when I think of Zora Neale Hurston, I think of Mules and Men.
Yes.
And, you know, much more of a blues, you know,
yes.
aesthetic.
They were coming from very different perspectives, for sure. Yeah.
I've been doing some work on Georgia Douglas Johnson, like just getting ready for a commission, and in reading her poetry, I have found a lot more like rough stuff than the ones that get said. But I think it just hasn't been that appealing to composers, or that, you know, they're in random publications where it's just 3 poems here or 2 poems here. So I think just poems like Heart of a Woman and I Was That Way Lovely that maybe are a little more genteel or the things that get said more often.
Okay.
Where did you find those?
So I was just digging around in what's in public domain now, and so I just found a few things here, a few things there.
Thank you. I have to keep looking. I'm in love with her now. Thank you. Well, I think perhaps we should close. Thank you so much.
Thank you.